And that's what climate change is about. It is literally, not figuratively, a clear and present danger.
We are in the beginning of a mass extinction.
The ability of CO2 to do the heavy work of creating a climate catastrophe is almost nil at this point.
The price of oil has been artificially elevated to the point of insanity.
That's not how you power a modern industrial system.
The ultimate goal of this renewable energy, plan is to reach the exact same point that we're at now.
You know who's tried that? Germany. 7 straight days of no wind for Germany. Their factories are shutting down.
They really do act like weather didn't happen prior to 1910.
Today is Friday.
That's right, Greta, you pint-sized protester. It is Friday, and this is our own personal Friday protest, the Climate Realism Show, episode number 115. EU's NetZero gets greenlashed. There's a reckoning in the making. So, Greenlash is defined as a backlash against a clean energy transition that they're pushing on people. Farmers, for example, have been straddled with restrictions in Europe. And, it basically, they're making calls to revert to common sense. In the European Union, there's been quite a protest movement pushing back. And in Belgium, farmers won that battle. Now it's moving into the political arena. The New York Times recently reported that after years of political consensus on the transition to cleaner energy, a greenlash began bubbling up as prices rose and right-wing candidates gained ground. I'm your host, Anthony Watts, Senior Fellow for Environment and Climate at the Heartland Institute. Joining me today, Dr. Benny Peiser of the Global Warming Policy Foundation. He's been following NetZero for a number of years, and he joined us as a special guest today. Thank you for being with us. Plus, we have Dr. H. Sterling Burnett, Director of the Arthur B. Robinson Center at the Heartland Institute, and Linnea Lueken, Research Fellow. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us today.
Good to be on.
So first, we're going to go into our regular feature, Crazy Climate News. And this is popular because, there's never a lack of crazy climate news, it seems. It's like every week, the media and the left comes up with yet something else. You shake your head and wonder, what the heck are they thinking? First one up is from CNN. Man overboard on the eastern U.S. heat wave. Yep. So they had Dr. Michael Mann on, and Dr. Mann made some quotes basically saying, it's doom-like situation, hotter than ever. Kathy Hochul jumped in later, the governor of New York, and saying that these are temperatures we've never experienced before, blah, blah, blah. So here's the problem. A friend of ours, Chris Martz, who works on Twitter, he went and did an analysis. And if you scroll down there, you can see he went and looked at all these different cities that Mann and CNN claimed were going to be, unprecedentedly hot, right? Well, it turns out, no. If you go back and look at the data, like for Atlanta and Chicago and New York, you look at all of the high temperatures, and they occurred way in the past. And this heat wave that they were pushing, the gloom and doom thing on, got nowhere close to the kind of temperatures that we've had in the past. But of course, that doesn't stop him from pushing the whole climate narrative. And people that are not in the know, who can't research such things, take it for granted. And now some people are worried that 90-degree temperatures are dangerous, right? It's just nuts. Guys, what do you think?
Well, in Texas, 90-degree temperatures aren't dangerous. They're low for summer. I've survived 60 odd years with temperatures averaging more than 90 degrees across the course of the summer. And according to the doctors, my health is pretty good. More importantly, what was interesting about March's article and some other things that I've seen is that he did a date-by-date comparison. So Hochul claims this date is the hottest they've ever had on that date. Mann claims this is the hottest that's ever happened on that date. And then you look at that date, and it's hot. Don't get me wrong, it's hot. We call it summer. But when you compare it to the hottest ever on that date, wrong. You'd think every so often they think, should we maybe check the data before we make a claim?
No, no,
I
no.
guess
That
it
would be
never
counter to
occurs
the
to them.
narrative.
Yeah, I guess it never occurs to them that maybe they ought to check the facts.
Yeah. Dr. Peiser, what would be the dangerous temperature for the UK? The real dangerous temperature and the claimed dangerous temperature. What do you think those are?
Well, that is a question of definition. The most dangerous temperatures in Britain are in the winter. That's when most people die. 10 times more people die from cold than from heat. And so that's our main problem is cold winters. But because of global warming, winters have become slightly milder. And that's the main feature really in Britain is that summer, we're always happy if the sun shines. It's not such a regular feature of British climate or weather, but our main problem still remains the winter.
Yeah.
And you've had a cold June, haven't you, so far?
Yes, wet, cold, but if you listened to the BBC, it's basically average. But, we have some, I think last June we had a very warm June. That was all down to global warming. This year we have a cold June and it's also down to global warming. So, whatever the weather, it's always blamed on climate change.
Right.
All righty. So on to our next crazy climate news. Green energy is causing power grid. Oh, wait, nope, that's not it. It's California decided to break with Governor Newsom over a loan to keep the state's last nuclear plant running. Yes, the San Onofre power plant down in Southern California. It extended its life after saying we're going to close it because Newsom, to his credit, realized that if we take this thing offline, we're going to be hosed because this thing generates like 15% of all the electricity in California. But of course, the environmentalists want to take it down because, nuclear is dangerous. And so they are pushing to get rid of it because it might go boom or something. Who knows? Anyway, so now Newsom's in a pickle because the extension may be off the table. And you know what? If I were running a power grid in California, I would just shut it off and say, you know what, folks? Electricity is dangerous and dirty. You don't need it. Here you go.
It's not Newsom that's in the pickle. It's the people that live in California who are in the pickle. My suspicion is Newsom will do okay. Though I believe the governor's mansion had some blackouts last summer. The sad thing is, like you said, Newsom showed a modicum of sanity last summer. He when the blackouts, the average, the yearly annual summer blackouts and brownouts, rolling blackouts and brownouts came to California last summer. He said he passed rules allowing diesel trucks, diesel generators to operate at night in the ports rather than drawing power from the electric grid. He waived air rules for emissions. And he said, that plant that he's pushed for decades to close, maybe we should keep that open. And so he came to an agreement. But it takes money to do that, folks. And now the legislature has cut his legs out from under him. So it's unclear what's going to happen. They've been given approval to stay open, but if they don't have funding, they're not going to generate electricity for free or losing money. So it will be interesting to see how bad it gets in California this summer.
Okay. Well, it just goes to show you that every time Greens and people that are concerned about climate change get involved with something, they wreck it. It really is that way. They just can't leave well enough alone. They're climate meddlers, I guess is the way to describe it. Okay, so we had a story about green energy, but apparently they took the story down because I don't know, maybe it was too graphic for some people because the title was "Green Energy was causing power grid failures." Oh gosh. Anyway, so it disappeared just literally seconds ago. Sort of like green energy itself. It just goes offline anytime. Anyway. So
Yeah.
we have a follow-up story for that about worse to come. Hopefully that link works, and we'll see if we can get there. Yes. Here we go. Biden EPA rules will cause blackouts for millions of Americans, a study warns. Well, they're not wrong. The fact is that green energy, whether it's solar or wind or something else, is unreliable. It is not designed to be 24/7, 365 like the rest of the grid is. The grid started out 24/7, 365 with reliable energy from coal and from nuclear power and from hydro, but the left is attacking all of those. And so what's left is basically a banana republic of electricity. Chime in, guys.
Well, here I am reporting from a cave in. I'm out of town for a conference, but
Aren't you in the state that's about to suffer the blackouts?
yes, I
That's-
am. I'm in beautiful San Diego. However, I guess I don't know. Maybe it's already suffering the blackouts. That's why it's so dark in this room. But no, it's just hotel room lighting isn't always the best for this kind of thing. But anyway, yeah, it's. I think that California's. It's hard for me to wrap my head around um, how they put the pieces together and decide that it would be a good thing for them to have an extraordinarily limited power supply, and just like import all of their fossil fuels from other states and then claim that they're being green or that they're you know chasing net zero or whatever. I don't know how just importing power from other places factors into their net zero issue, but yeah, I don't know. We've talked about this so much with regards to the blackouts. I mean, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission has been warning for like 2 years now that the path that we're on is unsustainable with shutting down like coal-fired and natural gas-fired power plants at a rate that's way too fast for even the best examples of wind and solar to keep up with. And they're not even trying, really. They're just closing them down. And then they plug the numbers into their calculator and it spits out a smiley face when they see, oh, our emissions are down. Well, now you're having rolling blackouts all over the place. And that isn't so good for the people that actually live there.
It's Venezuela all over again.
Yeah.
They don't
What's
seem to
interesting?
be aware of what's happening in Europe. In Germany, as you know, they've closed down all nuclear power plants. So they had to return to coal. And now they want to phase out coal over the next 10 years or so. And so Germany is planning, and the government, which includes the Green Party, is planning to build 30 new gas-fired power plants. So clearly, what is obvious is that you cannot run an industrial society, although Germany is, less and less industrial, but you cannot run a developed country on renewables without the necessary backup. And so this is the reason why now that they've closed down nuclear, they have to build 30 new gas-fired power plants. And that's the situation. And I expect the same to happen all over the US. When they close down nuclear, then the only option is either coal or gas. And the easiest and cheapest in the US seems to be gas.
Well, the interesting thing about that is, so I think Germany's electric rates are four times or more US rates right now. And they're going to build gas. Well, let's think about that. Who have they been relying on gas from? Well,
the Russians.
Russia. Yeah. They're not producing gas there in Germany. They're getting it from the Russians. And since the war, they've been getting some from us through LNG plants, right? They're starting to import. The problem there is Biden has now put a moratorium on new LNG plants. So just as Germany is going to be needing more and more gas, there's less and less that's going to be available. This
Well, it's
is,
self-sufficient.
this is really idiotic planning.
No, Germany is sitting on about 200 years worth of coal, the dirtiest
Yeah.
form of coal. So they'll go back to coal if need be. And they are currently 40% of electricity generation is coal. So if gas is too expensive, or the Russians, the European obviously currently have an embargo on Russian gas. So if that conflict isn't solved one way or another, Germany will just burn anything, just like the Chinese and the Indians. They'll go back to coal to keep the lights
right.
on.
Let's go on to our next crazy climate news item. Today, I don't know if you realize this, it's Climate Stripes Day. Yes, the stripes. You got to show the stripes. Let's scroll down there so we can see the stripes, please. There we go. This particular thing right here has been pushed by Professor Ed Hawkins of the UK as being indicative of our climate crisis, because we've gone from blue to red. This is representative of the temperature change over, the last 150 years or so, since about 1850. So there's people all over the place going nuts over this. And if you'll scroll up a little bit, Keely, the other direction, you'll see that there's merchandise all over the place. People are selling ties and T-shirts and dresses and flags and bedspreads, because we want to do something, to help the climate. So we're going to display our colors. It's kind of like, well, anyway.
Colors made with fossil fuels on clothing made with fossil fuels. That's helping the climate if you're concerned about fossil fuels. But Anthony, talk a bit about it's the meteorologists that are supposed to be wearing these ties, right? They're supposed to be all over the air today, showing you there.
Right, they're showing this, it'll be all over the evening news tonight with your favorite local TV weather guy sporting a tie and talking about the climate crisis, and showing how we're in the red. Oh no. Well, see, the problem with this is that these folks are not paying attention to geologic history. Climate is a long-term thing. It doesn't happen in the space of a decade. It has to be at least 3 decades of climate data before you can say there's any kind of a trend or change, right? So even 150 years is not indicative of long-term climate change. So here's the deal. If you scroll down a little bit further, we'll see that we put together our own stripes. There it is, right there. See that? How is it warmer in the past, you say? Well, if you look at geologic history in our next slide down there, you'll be able to see that temperatures actually change quite dramatically. We have had warmer temperatures in the far past, significantly warmer, 16 degrees centigrade above normal. And presently, we're currently in a cool period geologically. And we're not that far from an ice age, in terms of the whole bigger picture. And if we were to plot that stripes thing that they're promoting, about 150 years worth, it wouldn't even show up on this map. It's so tiny in the whole scheme of things that it wouldn't even register. It wouldn't even be a single pixel on this graph. So, climate change is a long-term event. It's been hotter in the past. It's hotter now in the cities because cities have a lot of UHI, and that really is what it boils down to. Don't freak out. By the way, this particular post is getting a lot of traction on What's Up With That. A lot of people commenting about it, and of course the usual naysayers are coming in there and telling us, well, we did it wrong. Well, this particular set of data is from James Hansen himself, yes, the father of global warming, who published this data in a 2008 peer-reviewed paper. So there. All right. Enough of the stripes.
You got a problem with that? Take it up with Hansen.
Okay. And so our final crazy climate news of the week is the Just Stop Oil crazy people. These people are nuts. I think they are seriously defective, because what are they doing? They're spraying Stonehenge because the climate's changing. Oh no. So we got to bring attention to ourselves. Well, all they're doing is basically showing the world what idiots climate protesters are. I mean, they've been out defacing all these different great pieces of art, or I remember a couple of years ago, they went down and defaced the Noxa lines in South America. They're just trying to bring attention to themselves. They're grasping at straws, and all they're doing, from as far as I can tell, and even people on the side of the climate, the hot side of the climate debate, don't like this either. They think this is counterproductive.
They're damaging historic, in this case, historic monoliths. I couldn't help but thinking, what a time for one of those monoliths to fall over. They topple every so often.
You like that big Monty Python foot coming down.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Except my one concern there was that if they did and they fell in the can, the spray would spray out even more. But I'm wondering if that's, surely, because they had to be cognizant of what they were defacing, that the paint they used was something that when weather comes along, it will come off. It's not like the paintings in the museums, right, where they put glass over it. So
they said that. They said it was powder that would wash off.
It was powder
that's a blessing.
Powder coating paint process.
Yeah, that's a blessing at least.
But they will be prosecuted nevertheless. It's a crime. It's a heritage site. So the problem we had in Britain is that quite a lot of judges let them off the hook, and that encouraged them to become more extreme. As judges give them free rein and not prosecute their damage they do, they take that as encouragement. And that's always the risk with extremist groups, that they will become more extreme, more radical as a result.
If you see their leader, he's on Twitter, I think. He's definitely got like kind of a little bit of like a Manson or Jonestown vibe. It's very weird. The whole organization is extremely creepy and strange. They have, I believe that the funding that they get is from some oil heiress or something. So that's interesting. I guess it's some kind of a penance. I'm not really sure. But yeah, I can't imagine that the people that they get to do this stuff aren't like in some way mentally ill, because I can't imagine that you would look at this stuff and think like, oh yeah, this is going to enamor people to our cause and make them pay attention, as if we don't already get hammered enough with climate change stuff.
It's the same kind of logic that's used when they strap bombs to kids and say, go die for jihad,
Well, I don't know about that, but
it is, in a way, it is a doomsday cult. They do think that we're facing Armageddon. And so therefore, that's the danger. They say by any means. So they will use any means. And unfortunately, these doomsday cults have a habit to become radicalized and more extreme. So that's a real worry.
Well, I don't know how close you're to bringing back the gibbet, but that might be effective and dissuaded some of them. Here in the U.S., I've advocated bringing back stocks. So,
yeah. All right. So let's go into our cartoons for the week, and then we'll be on to our main discussion about NetZero and Europe. Our first cartoon is it's poignant because it kind of talked to what we just showed you about Stonehenge. Doctor, I'm depressed because of the weather and how it's going to be in 30 years. Have you tried destroying priceless artwork? I mean, yeah, that's the whole logic of these things. Okay, next cartoon. The next cartoon's about NetZero, how it works. And this is from Josh in the UK. I helped Josh with this one, actually. He seeks me out from time to time for some commentary on the cartoons that he's working on. And so this one starts out with a computer spitting out a printout. It says, "Ha ha, ludicrous, just what I need. Use computer model to predict catastrophe." And then the second thing is, persuade gullible journalists and terrify children with imminent doom, based on predictions. And then you send it to the politicians, and something must be done. You can tax the air, make far-fetched catastrophe illegal. And then of course, all of the green insanity rules come down, and people are all of a sudden criminals for just trying to stay warm. And they create a crisis of poverty, injustice, and death. And then, of course, the politicians and the scientists celebrate, we've saved the world, made a fortune in the process. Repeat and rinse. And that is how net zero works. And we have one more cartoon about net zero. I can't afford the bills. Zero. This is what net zero means for you as an individual. Zero heat, zero money, zero cars, zero flying, zero jobs, and zero chance. Basically, net zero means you're giving up pretty much everything that is near and dear to you in your life today. So to talk about net zero, we have Dr. Benny Peiser with us, who is with the Global Warming Policy Foundation in the UK and also with Net Zero Watch. And there's been a lot of stuff going on in Europe where they're basically going through the process of trying to implement this stuff, but it's showing the United States the pain of this net zero madness. And it's becoming very unpopular politically. In fact, in Belgium, and I want to go to this next link, where protesting farmers spray manure at riot police in the Brussels streets. I mean, talk about spraying things with orange. I love this one. We're spraying back. They're out there in front of the Parliament buildings with a manure spreader, and the fire department's trying to dilute that, not really very effectively, but they're giving it their best shot. But the farmers apparently made a big impact because they just would not give up. They kept doing this for weeks on end. And so, Dr. Peiser, what do you think's going on here? I mean, have people just had enough of this nonsense? And do you think that pushback is going to become the norm now?
Well, clearly there has been a lot of protest, not just among farmers, about the consequences of net zero policies. The farmers are concerned, obviously, about new legislation that curtails their work, their agricultural work, and people in Europe are concerned about having to basically, or being told they have to give up their cars and have to replace their conventional cars with EVs and have to rip out their gas boilers and replace them with very expensive heat pumps. These are concerns that are growing, and the election was partly about these issues. It wasn't the biggest issue, but it was one of the European election. And there has been a quite noticeable shift in the public mood and public opinion and public voting on these issues. So there is a growing protest movement. And the most interesting development today, the unions in Britain, or the workers in the steel factory in Wales, have announced the first strike against these net zero policies 2 days after the UK elections. So this will be the first strike under a new government, which is very likely to be a Labour government. And the first strike, just 3 days after the election, will be a strike against net zero policies, which are basically closing down a steel factory in Wales. And it will be very interesting to see how the Labour leader, who is very likely to be the new prime minister, will deal with the first strike just days after coming into Downing Street against his own policies.
Was it
Now, here's an article from your website that says the Reform Manifesto offers up the chance to vote against net zero. Do you think that the politician will actually allow people to vote against net zero?
Well, the Reform Party, which is a fairly new party on the right of the Conservative Party, in their manifesto have pledged to scrap net zero, the targets altogether. And they might actually get a bigger share of the vote than the Conservatives. So they have basically taken, a lot of votes from Conservatives and are likely to have a very good election. And they are the first party to run on an anti-net zero platform. So we'll have to wait and see how this pans out. But the so-called net zero consensus that is now breaking up, not just in Britain, all over Europe, a lot of parties are beginning to roll back. A lot of governments are beginning to water down and delay and roll back unpopular net zero policy. However, in the European Parliament, the mainstream parties are still have a huge majority, and it is likely that the conservative faction in the European Parliament is going to form alliances with the socialists rather than with the populist parties on some of these issues. There's one issue that might actually be reversed, because it's a existential threat to Europe's industry, and that is the ban of conventional cars, which would force everyone to buy EVs, and the European political class is beginning to realize it would be the death knell for Europe's car industry. And so I expect the new European Parliament and the EU Commission, which is the official, basically, government, to renege on the sales ban of ICE cars and open a new venture for conventional cars, because otherwise Europe's car industry will essentially be killed off by the Chinese.
Let me ask you a couple of questions, Benny. So it seems to me that there have been some victories, not just in the EU Parliament, but some nations are saying, forget it. They're part of the EU, but they say we're just not going to do this. And Switzerland recently said that they've told the International Court that we're not going to comply with your ruling, that we've got to do more to save the world from climate change. Countries are saying we're going to scrap the boiler ban. We're going to scrap the mandate for heat pumps, which I think England is even backing off on some of that. UK is backing off on some of that. I guess my questions are, with this happening, who knows whether Macron will survive in Paris, but you've got maybe the Conservatives losing votes, the new party gaining votes. Will there, I don't know how, it seems to me England's parliament is a little bit different from other parliaments, but maybe I'm wrong here. You say the Labour will probably be the government, but if the two parties combined, Conservatives and the new party, have a majority combined, if they could form a coalition government, can y'all do that, or is it just majority rule in England?
Well, it's not. So the UK voting system is completely different to the European system, where small parties can have significant number of members of parliament. That's not possible in Britain. So we could have a situation where this new party, this Reform Party, might have a higher percentage of votes and hardly any MPs. A higher percentage of votes than the Conservatives and hardly any seats, because in the UK it's first past the poll. In other words, it doesn't matter what your percentage is, it's whoever has the most votes gets the MP, and anyone else just gets nothing. So in all likelihood, the Conservatives will have, there won't be a chance of a coalition because there won't be enough real MPs. And in any case, it's unlikely to be enough to form a government. In Europe, the situation is such that although the populist parties have made gains, they still are a minority in parliament against a vast majority of mainstream parties. That's a reality. But the mainstream parties are beginning to realize that if they continue business as usual, they will hemorrhage even more votes and will lose even more support. So something is going to give. In terms of, Switzerland is not part of the EU. So Switzerland can basically, and that's what they've done. They've had a referendum where the majority of the public actually voted against these climate plans. That's why the European Court of Human Rights said you can't do that. And the court said, when it comes to climate change, democracy and the vote of voters is probably not the best way to deal with these problems. I mean, they said that, which is quite something. But Holland, you're right, the new Dutch government has abandoned the ban on gas boilers, or the mandate that everyone has to have a heat pump. So there, and even Britain, the British government has delayed some of its policies. So there is clearly a recognition that the public is moving in the opposite direction. How this pans out, no one knows. In the meantime, it's beginning to dawn even on the political class that the developing world, that countries like China and India and the Asian countries are burning fossil fuels as if there's no tomorrow. And we now have record high usage of fossil fuels around the world, obviously record high CO2 emissions, and there is no end in sight. There's absolutely no end in sight as long as these economies grow, at least for the next couple of decades. Everyone all energy agencies expect the use of fossil fuels to remain fairly high.
It makes me, when I hear about the steel mill closing in Wales, or the strike that's going to come there, I wasn't a fan of his in particular, but it brings to mind, where is Arthur Scarsdale when you need him, right? Who fought for the coal miners back in the 70s and 80s.
Well, this is the irony. The irony is that the Labour government, which is basically very likely the Labour Party, which is likely to form the next government, will close down oil and gas. So the Conservatives close down coal, and Labour will close down the rest of it. And they will be proud that they will close down oil and gas. And what is Britain going to do? Well, we'll just import it from around the world with a much higher CO2 carbon footprint and much higher prices, and killing our own jobs and our own industries for looking good.
No one sees the irony of that party being called Labor when they're putting people out of work, labor unions out of work. They were founded. They were literally founded to support the workers, and yes. Now they completely don't care about the workers.
These are the wrong workers, and therefore they promise that they will create the right workers, the green workers, right? That's a promise.
Yeah, I've seen some of these green workers. They lie in graves. Is what happens. Is people die and they're buried.
Yeah. Well, and most of the green jobs are going to China anyhow, because European companies no longer produce these technologies. I mean, the solar industry doesn't exist anymore in Europe. That has been completely devastated.
Really? Completely gone?
Completely. And
Wow.
they asked a few months ago for subsidies to the remaining few. There are just half a dozen or so They asked that they cannot survive without additional funding. The EU said no, and basically that's it. They cannot compete with Chinese solar panels. And in a lot of other green technologies like EVs, the Europeans cannot compete because the Chinese are using cheap energy, comparatively cheaper work as well, jobs. So that combination means their green technologies are much, much cheaper. In any case, so it will be interesting because the unions have actually come out against Labour's energy policy, because I think they estimate roughly 100,000 jobs are at risk for closing down North Sea oil and gas production, which is, as I said, absurd, because everyone accepts that Britain will still need oil and gas for at least 30, if not more, years. And all we're doing is closing down, never mind the shale treasure we're sitting on. Britain is sitting on a huge shale basin in the north of the country, and no one wants to dig out the gold. So all we're doing is basically importing the stuff, virtue signaling, killing our own jobs and industries just for looking nice and stupid.
It is interesting, from an American perspective, that, we need to understand over here that your conservative party isn't quite what we would call conservative, right? Like it was, I remember everyone was pretty excited for Boris Johnson when he was coming in initially. Everyone thought, wow, they're going to really turn it around. It's going to be totally different than Labor. And we're finally going to stomp out some of this crazy green stuff and whatnot. And then he immediately turns and does almost worse than what I think the previous administration, or I'm not really sure what the correct terminology would be.
Well, what do you expect from a guy that has hair like that?
but and immediately bends the knee to all the green interests. We complain in the United States about having, or at least some of us do, about having something of a uniparty, where it seems like certain interests on the right and on the left in our political arena share similar goals that are not aligned with what would be good for the public, especially when it comes to the green stuff, right? And it seems like it's very severe over there in the UK in particular.
Well, this is one of the main reasons why we have these populist parties, because what used to be conservative parties, what they've done, and Angela Merkel in Germany was the first to realize, if you want to win elections, 20 years ago, the idea was to go and park your tank in the middle of the political spectrum. So all the mainstream conservative parties suddenly became social democratic. So basically occupying the middle ground, taking the more conservative voters for granted. And they've lost them by going, we are more social democratic. We will basically adopt all the latest fashion ideas. They may have won elections for a long time, but now they are losing badly. So there is a risk that if we don't have, the full spectrum of political views, and all the parties move into the middle, you leave these kind of fringes to populist parties. And that's exactly what happened, both on the left and on the right. Personally, I think that is a very dangerous development. It would have been much better to keep the mainstream parties more representative. They are not really that representative anymore, and the elections show that. And if you lose part of your electorate, well, then you open the door for new parties, and they have now emerged, and they have become increasingly popular as the mainstream parties have failed to, because they've jumped on that many bandwagons, they've failed to turn the economy around. Not only that, but economy in Europe is stagnating. Industries are moving away. The economy is stagnant. And there's a lot of deindustrialization going on because of high energy prices and the net zero agenda. And people don't like that, obviously. So it is a very risky path. And I think we've seen the peak of the green agenda. And I think there will be in coming years a gradual realignment towards reality. And the EU has already announced that they have degraded climate change and climate policy, relegated to much below other priorities. Their main priority now is defense and national security, and the whole climate issue will be relegated.
First, I guess I don't want to interject much here, except to say, Anthony, when you pick on someone's hair, it's that's a low blow. I would take Boris Johnson's hair. I might style it differently, but believe me,
be careful what you wish for, Sterling.
Look, I would take his hair even if I had to leave it the way he styles it.
You know, I'm sure somewhere in the UK in a costume shop you can buy a Boris hairpiece.
But I don't want a costume or a wig. I want the actual hair.
All right, Benny, I'm tasking you with going out and getting Sterling a Boris hairpiece and sending it over to him, okay?
So,
right.
You see the realignment, but at the same time, EU has passed some rules recently that are going to impose, you know, they're not called climate rules, the ESG stuff that they did. You say that it's bankrupted, that the EU has bankrupted their solar, and it's coming all from China. But China, there's no way any audit under the EU's new ESG policy will pass that as environmentally sound, as it's being constructed by coal. They'll have to issue waiver after waiver, in which case, in what sense is the ESG policy effective?
Well, in Britain, ESG, even you know, weapons production is regarded as ESG. So if you know what politicians come up with, no, seriously. So look, the Europeans have put tariffs on Chinese products now, particularly on EVs. So we're facing a real trade war with China, and net zero is a real threat to peace and stability, because there is no global agreement. There is no level playing field. The Europeans are doing this more or less on their own. They're shooting themselves in the foot and then blaming everyone else for their economic problems. So this is the situation we're facing in Europe. I cannot see this is going to get any better. Eventually, some countries will decide to move away from it. As I said, there is a realization that there are much bigger priorities like defense or the economy over the green agenda. And the Green parties were the biggest losers in the elections. I think that also signals to the political class that the green era is becoming ever more distant past.
To shift gears a little bit, I'm curious what your thoughts are on some of the ULEZ stuff, because that's like somewhat appalling to me, or to someone who, you know, values the ability to travel where you want to, the way that you want to, in your own city, in your own town. The idea that you'd be taxed to leave your neighborhood or something if you use the wrong vehicle to do it is kind of horrifying to me. And I've been very enamored of the so-called Blade Runners lately, who have been like sabotaging those ULEZ enforcement cameras and stuff. How far do you think that they were going to take that idea? And do you think that it's pretty well a dead idea at this point because of the backlash that's gotten, or do you think they're going to keep trying to push it?
Oh, they will keep trying to push it. This is just the beginning. The next step will be that because the move towards EVs, although it is very sluggish and currently in crisis, governments are losing tax revenue from petrol. So what is now on the agenda is to charge drivers by the mile. So basically, you will be monitored wherever you go and how many miles you drive. And for every mile you drive, you will have to pay a fee. That is the next step. So these green policies, local policies, car policies, that I think will continue, will become accelerated, because they need every pound and every cent they can. They need the money. Although there are protest groups, I don't see that this is going to be abandoned.
Yeah. So I want to point out that here at the Heartland Institute, we are good at research, and that's one of the things we do best. And while Sterling and Benny were talking, I did some research, and I found what you need, Sterling, right there. You can get it only 10 pounds.
10 pounds.
All right. And on that note, I want to switch to questions. So let's go with those.
Okay, great. We have some good questions here from our wonderful audience, who we always love to hear from. First up here is, AI is going to require massive amounts of electricity. It seems that some are changing their tune on nuclear. What do you think?
Oh, definitely. There is a big move towards, or interest in, nuclear all over Europe. Again, a very dramatic shift in public opinion and also among policymakers. Problem, of course, is that the regulations are so huge and so costly that nuclear power remains extremely expensive and takes ages to develop and to deploy. But clearly the Swedes, the new Swedish government abandoned its renewable energy targets altogether and said, we will build 10 new nuclear power plants. But that takes 20 years or so. But the French have done it. They've built 60 nuclear power plants within 20 years or so. So you can do it. And I expect Europe to build nuclear almost everywhere. So there is a growing interest because people realize that if you want to have 24/7 reliable energy, then nuclear is the most reliable form of low carbon energy. And given that is unlikely to go away, there will be a big boom in nuclear. And we don't know, with the small modular reactors, which have been heavily promoted in recent years, whether they will deliver, at what cost. We'll have to wait and see. But I expect a nuclear renaissance in Europe and in much of the rest of the world.
Great, thank you. This is not a question, but it's a comment that is part of a continuing conversation that we've been having with our friend Andrew Godrich. He says, my $20 pledge from episode 114 is currently in the hands of the Royal Mail, soon to be passed to US Mail, who will deliver it to the Heartland Institute, a modern day Pony Express. So thank you very much, Andrew. And this is a joke, or I guess hopefully not a joke. Hopefully he's actually mailing us $20. But based on the fact that we have been demonetized. And I want to speak to that really quickly. A couple weeks ago, we received a notification from YouTube, and we noticed during one of our live streams that we could no longer accept super chats, meaning this YouTube channel has been demonetized. We just got word this morning, according to Keeley, that we lost our appeal due to, quote, a sensitive content policy suspension, but we can reapply in September. So we'll see how that goes. Thank you guys for keeping up with us on that.
In the meantime, they can just do what Andrew did, or go online to Heartland and provide, send donations that way.
Right.
Yep.
Or you could just believe what the climate alarmists say, that we're funded by big oil and we don't need any more damn money.
Please don't believe that. It's
Right.
it's not true.
Anyway, never taken a dime from big oil, never. Me personally, and none of you guys have either, as far as I know. It's just it's a convenient smear that the left uses when they don't have anything substantive to say.
Yeah, big oil's never given me any money, but I tell you what, they sure take a lot every time I go to the gas station.
Right.
All right. Here's our next question. How much will the climate change if we achieve the impossible to reach net zero? Would anybody actually notice the difference? Anthony, I think this would be a question for you.
Well, I've seen various different calculations. Jorn Lomberg did something related to the Paris climate goals, and we're talking hundreds of a degree based on what some of these calculations show out. Maybe a tenth of a degree if we're lucky. But I'll point out that humans can't tell the difference between a room at 20 degrees centigrade, 68 degrees Fahrenheit, and a room that's at 21 degrees centigrade, about 69.5 degrees Fahrenheit. They just can't tell the difference walking between these two rooms. So it's not likely that anybody's going to be able to tell the difference if we stop using, fossil fuels and other forms of energy. However, they will be able to tell the difference at the market when there's no food and there's no cars on the road and other things like that.
Yeah.
Oh, and when they're cold in the winter, they'll be able to tell.
Yeah, definitely. Chris says Blair et al. In the center is what made me leave the UK. Is there any reason yet to return? It's kind of a tongue-in-cheek comment, but
yeah,
might be fun to talk about.
It's a very difficult situation all over Europe, not just in Britain. The whole kind of traditional political landscape is up in the air. It's a huge change in the air. We'll have to wait and see. We don't know what the next government is going to do. No one knows what the next government is going to do. In all likelihood, they will do what Labour governments tend to do, is tax more and spend more. But the problems we have in Europe, it's not just Britain, it's all over Europe, or in most European countries. Some countries are doing better than others. It's a very difficult situation. So it's a personal choice, really, what country or what state you decide to live.
Okay, we have this from Energy Colonizer. I hope we have seen the peak of compliance with the green agenda, but will populist victories result in practical return to traditional energy like the Hinkley Point C nuclear plant in the UK?
Well, Hinkley Point C will be built regardless of the green agenda. That will be built. It will be the most expensive power plant in the world. It cost overall will be something like 100+ billion. For one power plant, if you include all the subsidies that the government has basically agreed to. Obviously, we need nuclear, but not that kind of nuclear, because that's astronomical and unaffordable. I think we've seen the peak of the green era, but rolling it back will take a long, long time. And no one yet knows exactly how it will be done. But my guess is that it will eventually, there will be a basically deadline for subsidies for renewables and a return to energy realism, which would be basically a path from natural gas to nuclear, which is a much more realistic pathway than the renewables, which are a dead end, which people are beginning to realize are so unreliable and intermittent and expensive that they are just not viable for any, developed country. never mind developing country. So I think that it will be more a return to more realist energy policies, but it will take time.
Okay, Sterling, I think I'm going to pitch this one to you. I'm in the USA. I'm concerned that politicians in a conservative state like mine, Utah, are way more enamored with net zero via carbon capture and sequestration. How do I convince them of the stupidity of this? And that's from Bill Peckney.
That is a tough question because the net zero stuff comes with so much federal dollars. Everyone seems to like federal money. You know, all these Republicans, not a single Republican voted for the inflation, the laughably titled Inflation Reduction Act. And yet now they are saying, we can't roll back this provision. We can't roll back that provision. But why? Because they're getting money for it. Look, carbon capture is not stupid. Carbon capture and storage is stupid. Oil industry has been doing carbon capture for decades to enhance oil recovery. There's nothing wrong with carbon capture per se. It's only when you want to lock it up in a reservoir and pretend it's going to stay there forever and pretend we have a large enough reservoir to store it all and build a lot of pipelines at public expense, taking people's private property. That's what you have to convince them is this harms their constituents. People are losing their property rights for something that does nothing whatsoever to fight climate change. It's all a big money grab. And unless you can convince politicians to stop taking money for stupid ideas, and good luck with that, I honestly don't know.
I would build a net zero home of the future and put it on a trailer and then haul it up to the state capitol and let the politicians tour it and see how fun that is.
Well, I mean, you have to elect politicians who do what they say they believe. If they don't believe the climate is a catastrophic, then we don't need carbon capture and storage. If you vote for one, you can't say you believe the other because the only justification for carbon capture and storage is the idea that climate change is we face a climate catastrophe and there's no evidence of that. So you need politicians that walk the walk, not just talk the talk.
I thought Obama had pulled the plug on all these CCS projects.
Oh no, they're back.
Well, they're very
back
popular
with a
again now.
They're back with a vengeance under the Inflation Reduction Act. It's all part of just billions and billions of funding that these guys, Doug Burgum, he comes from a state where this is the guy they're considering for VP. God, I think that would be a disaster. He comes from a state that gets a lot of oil revenue. My suspicion is they also have some gas associated with the oil, and he is going to destroy the industry. But he said, what we need is all of the above, and let's build those carbon capture and storage pipelines through my state. Well, when people start losing their property, when they challenge the rights of way, the takings from these, already courts are saying, oh yeah, this is a public good. So you can implement takings. You can start, you have to pay them just so-called just compensation. I don't know what just compensation is. When you're taking my property against my will, you can tell me, oh, well, that's what the market value is. If I wanted to sell at the market value, I could have done that before. The point is I didn't want to sell it. So, you try and convince the people whose property you're taking that, that this is a good idea. And especially when you can't show that it'll have any climate effect, it's stupid. But I don't feel strongly about it.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I think that a lot of oil producing states think that will be the way for them to protect their industry from getting shut down by the Greens, but it won't, because the Greens don't want you pulling oil from the ground, period. They don't care about carbon capture. It's used as a bludgeon, and that's pretty much it.
In Europe, the coal industry used to promote CCS for the last 20 years, and it didn't stop them from being shut down. So it's we've known that this is just a kind of political game, but I was under the impression that Obama, when he was president, essentially closed all the CCS funding and pulled the plug on all the US. I can remember about 5-6 years ago, or 7 years ago, that it was under Obama, on the Obama administration, that they said none of the projects we funded, and they spent billions on it, actually worked. None of them actually worked. I mean, they tried it, didn't work.
Well, like Linnea pointed out, it's all back. So it doesn't matter what Obama did 8 years ago. It's being spent today on the technology that didn't work then. They haven't changed the technology. It hasn't improved. And the justification for it is no more valid now than it was then.
Right. Oh, well.
Another energy question from Chris Nesbitt. Are SMRs a real thing, or are they still coming soon? They're a real thing, and they work. It's just the same issue that always plagues all nuclear projects, which is balancing the cost to bring it to market against all the regulations and whether or not they'd actually be able to turn a profit on power generation with it. In this case, several SMR projects that were supposed to go ahead in the United States have been pushed back over and over and over again, a lot of times because of the economic feasibility.
And they're commercially ready now. There's been a kind of a quiet background movement of this, and the thing about a large nuclear reactor is it requires a large amount of infrastructure to manage, and a lot of things go wrong when you've got that large infrastructure, or can go wrong. And so when you've got a small compact device that's designed to serve a small region, it's much easier to manage and much easier to keep safe, because there's less large systems that you have to take control of. And you also don't have to ship electricity as far, so it's more efficient.
But
right, and it's you can put them all over the place. It could be for a data center or something.
The key for SMRs is not their size; it's their modularity. It's being modular. The problem with nuclear plants is not. I don't think it's not all the infrastructure, all the support. It's every nuclear plant built is almost a one-off. They have to redesign every new thing because the regulations change, or they find this difference or that difference, and they want you to do it a different way now because we know better now than we knew when the last one was built that's functioned for 40 years, that never had a problem. So when you have to build...
you can't go find parts for a 1957 Chernobyl at the hardware store.
So when you've got all these one-offs, it's no wonder they're expensive. I think you could build a large nuclear plant cheaply if you could make them modular, but they won't let those be modular. So, I'd like to have modular nuclear plants, but I'm not convinced they'll be. I asked somebody once, we have nuclear subs, we have nuclear ships. Why can't we have nuclear neighborhoods? And someone from the Navy pointed out, well, do you know what happens if you have a problem on a nuclear sub with your nuclear plant? You scram it, you drop it into the bottom of the ocean. No one wants a nuclear thing dropped into their water table.
The Mariana Trench, to drop it at the bottom of that, it ain't going nowhere. It's not coming back.
That's not. I don't think that is the main problem with SMRs. No. There are nuclear power plants, in near towns and cities, and they've been working fine for 40, 50 years. So I don't think that is the issue. The main issue, as I understand it, is as was said, are they economically viable? Are they viable? And that is where we have to wait and see how long it takes to make them economic viable, because it's an issue of technology and regulation. You have to bring down the cost so that you can actually, because once you have them and they are economic, you can actually deploy them much, much faster than these large nuclear power plants. And we'll have to wait and see.
But
you know,
the problem with the economic viability argument is this: you're comparing them to what? Highly subsidized wind and solar with battery backup.
Oh, of course.
Batteries are the most expensive form of energy outside of offshore wind,
yeah, of course.
but it's all subsidized. So it's like, oh, well, they're cheaper than
And SMRs will be subsidized. I have no doubt. Like nuclear power plants are subsidized.
Well, then I don't know what it means to be economically viable then, because none of them are economically viable if that's the standard.
Well,
coal and natural gas get built on their own.
Yeah. True. That's why coal and gas are the cheapest forms of energy, of electricity generation by far. So, but that's part of the issue. From my reading, it's not a technological hurdle; it's an economic hurdle and a regulatory hurdle. And it takes ages to get them through regulation.
Yeah, no.
So we'll have to wait and see
whether the regulations are the economic hurdle.
Yeah. True.
Yep. Our final question here. I had another one that I from Chris Shattuck, who kind of again jokingly asked us if we could just apply for Soros money since our since our stuff, but I don't really think we have time to address that one, even though it's very funny. But we are going to skip ahead to this question, which is a good one to end our show on, which is from Emma Howells, who says, do you think net zero is achievable? And I'm going to add to that, even if it was desirable, which it's not, is it actually possible? And what does it mean?
Well, it's a question of time. It's certainly not achievable by 2050. That's for certain. That's for sure. But if you think about 100 or years or so, I think eventually we will move to a completely different energy system, mainly driven by nuclear energy. I have no doubt. And gas and coal and oil will eventually diminish over decades to come. This century. Who knows? I mean, how long this process will take? It will certainly take much longer than 30 years.
I'm a philosopher by training, and we talk about logically possible. There's the logically possible, there's the physically possible, and there's politically possible. Net zero is logically possible. It's even physically possible. All you have to do is, by law, and enforce it fiercely, say, we're going to go without electricity now. We can't drive now. We're passing a law. We see your car on the road, we arrest you.
All right.
They could do that. It's not politically possible.
Yeah. I would just say, let's borrow what the Russians say, net zero. Anyway. All right. That's our show for today. Thanks for joining us, Dr. Peiser. I want to remind everyone that he has a website called NetZero Watch. Just put that into your Google search, NetZero Watch, and you'll find some interesting stories there on what's going on in Europe. And of course, also, we have some interesting websites as well, climateataglance.com, where we've got facts on almost every climate issue, climaterealism.com, where we debunk the media daily, energyataglance.com, where we give you insight into how energy works and how it doesn't in some cases. And of course, my website, whatsupwiththat.com. Thanks again, everybody, for joining us. I hope you have a fantastic Friday and a wonderful weekend. Bye-bye.